Hello and welcome to the Power Fish Podcast. I'm Fish.
And I'm Ben. Today we are going to talk about morality. What is it? Why is it? Is it actually a thing? Who knows? We're going to try and figure that out today.
Where is it?
Where is it? That's actually a real question.
Can we get some?
Can we get some of that? Yeah. So we're going to talk about morality. We have talked about morality quite a bit. It's no new thing on this podcast. Typically, we talk about it when you and I are arguing about it, because I have grown comfortable with a moral framework that Sam Harris puts forward, and I vibe with it, but that doesn't mean I am totally convinced by it, but I definitely vibe with it. But we're going to get to the basics today. First of all, what is morality? What do you think morality is? What would you define morality as?
What would I define morality as? Well, let me attack this first as how I would define it pre any research. I'll start there. Well, let's actually do this first. So previously in my life, I was indoctrinated into the religious cult that is Christianity. Sorry,
Right.
that was a little hardcore.
Both of us.
Yeah. So I would at that moment define morality as anything that services the kingdom of God. But of course, that's not where I'm at today. And before
Right.
research, I think I would define morality as, this is basic, but the good of humanity.
I would say the framework by which we determine right versus wrong. I would say.
Right and wrong,
Or
and
good
how-
and bad, maybe.
right and wrong, how it relates to, I don't know, society, I guess. Because you can't.
But I would say it expands even further than that, because many people apply right and wrong moral principles to things like other living things, any living thing for that matter, or sometimes not living things. If you destroy a statue that's been built for 20 years, some people would say that's wrong, but it's not.
I mean,
You know,
right, but if you destroy a statue, people would argue that it's wrong because of its impact on society. That relates back to society, or what you do to animals, because what you do to animals ultimately, for the most part, impacts society. How we as a culture interact with.
I don't think that's how a typical person defending the morality of an animal would defend it. I think they would say it's because the animal is experiencing suffering, not because it affects this society.
I guess that's true. I guess what the point I'm driving at is morality in a culture. We're starting off hot.
We are starting it off.
Morality in a culture is you want your culture to move in a certain direction. The certain direction is the caring of animals. And so the way that it relates in a society is you want a society that cares for animals. And it is a societal atrocity to do not that.
But it's not for the sake of the society. It's for the sake of the animals.
Right.
Is what I would say.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So there's no cold starts here on the Power Fish podcast. But I did write down some more formal definitions of what morality is.
I'm going to stop you. Would you, though, say that morality...
I've been stopped.
You have been stopped. You would agree, though, that morality often relates, is a function of conscious creatures enacting within a society, for the most part. Morality in terms of a population is often how it is discussed.
Sure.
Okay.
Most people aren't going to talk about morality. If there's
we talked about you have been stopped. We talked about we talked about in one episode. I don't even remember the context. We talked about a person in a vacuum, void of culture and void of other
morality would barely even be a.
That's what I'm saying. Morality, you could theoretically exist, but it's not practically going to exist. Because
if there is one individual person on planet Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and my point being, morality often arises from a society, a culture.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Absolutely. That is if you are of a non-objectivist worldview. If you believe in an objective moral framework, those moral codes are out there in the ether, existing, whether you like it or not. For a religious example, that would be the case.
Okay. That makes a little sense. Potentially.
Okay.
I don't know.
So I initially started writing these frameworks down, and I wanted to categorize them by objective moral frameworks and relative moral frameworks. For example, something like an objective moral framework would be utilitarianism, very common. Something like a relative moral framework would be like emotivism, another very common one. I sort of realized that isn't going to work very well. So what an objective moral framework is called in the philosophical world is realism, moral realism. That would mean that it's pretty self-explanatory. Objective morality is something that is real as matter, as real as anything else that we describe as real, which is why it's called moral realism. And then there's the antithesis of it, anti-realism. And under these two overarching frameworks, there is what's called cognitivism and non-cognitivism. So these categorize moral frameworks in more of a semantic column, so to speak. They put these down in an organizational way of semantics and what people mean when they express a moral claim. So some examples of a cognitivist framework is when you express a moral claim, you're expressing a truth claim, something that can be true or false, right? And it's called cognitivist because it's usually a cognitive, intellectual thing. So, an example, one of them is called subjective cognitivism. So this is the description of this is the truth or falsity of a moral claim is grounded in that person's opinion or society. So when someone expresses murder is wrong, what a cognitivist would interpret that as is them saying, I believe murder is wrong. And that is a truth claim. That can be either true or false. That can be true that they do believe murder is wrong, or it can be false that they can believe murder is wrong. And the objectivity of this framework is grounded in their opinion or their society.
Right.
So if someone's society, these are also split into two different things. There's subjectivist cognitivism, which is that was just called, but there's also societal cognitivism. So this is considered an objective moral framework, but it's relative to society, interestingly.
Right.
So if, for example, our society would say murder is wrong, and if I then say murder is right, I'm objectively wrong.
Per our society.
Per the grounding of our society's objective
This reminds
framework.
me of the conclusion that we had at the end of the last episode. We talked about this, if you recall. Because you came in hot and heavy with morality as a basis of conscious creature morality. And I was resistant to that.
The well-being of conscious creatures.
At the time. And your illustration, which is really Sam Harris's illustration, was the many peaks and valleys of the moral landscape. And my counter argument to that at the time was, what is good for well-being? Maximizing well-being can be good, and diminishing well-being can be bad objectively. But how you get there is relative.
Right.
And it kind of reminds me, it's different but also kind of the same.
It is similar
argument.
to that. Could be described as a subjective cognitivist worldview.
Because insert into the individual sliders of morality, insert into that cultural preference, and where you're born and what time frame you're born in, and there now you have your relativism in an objectivist framework of the word we were just talking about. What's the word?
Morality?
No. Well-being. That's the one.
Right. So, and this worldview, subjectivist cognitivism, is similar to that, where there can be an objective framework grounded on something relative.
Mm-hmm.
The moral landscape, Sam Harris's proposal of the moral landscape, is a reversal of that. It's an objective framework of the well-being of conscious creatures with subjective conditions layered on top of that. So it's a reversal, but it's very similar.
Yeah.
So another cognitivist theory is constructivism. So this one is it's still a cognitivist theory. So when someone purports a moral claim, it is something that can be taken as a true or false claim, something that is truth apt, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Except the objectivity of its truth or falsity is constructed via rational thought. So the description I wrote down for it was: the truth or falsity of a claim is grounded in a rationally constructed framework of what is and isn't moral. So if you and I are discussing right now, I say murder, and then you say, but what if you murder? What if you get murdered? And I would say, I don't like. And then we would then say, murder bad. Because we have then just constructed an idea of, through logical reason, that we don't like murder. Because, even though if I might like murder, I wouldn't like it done to me. And we can reasonably assume that applies for everybody, that they wouldn't like to be murdered.
Yeah, you can reasonably assume that.
Yeah. Therefore, now we have an objective moral framework.
I mean, that only works on the most universal of issues, I would say. That you couldn't apply that kind of logic to just anything.
No, but what a constructivist worldview is if we have come to a conclusion via logical processes on what should be determined as right versus wrong, that would become the objective basis of morality.
If it is possible, it is universal, basically. If it can be done, it is.
I'm not picking up what you're putting down with that.
It's not claiming that any issue can be solved through reason. It's just that if something could be universally true, it is.
Kind of. Yeah.
Okay. I mean that's what you said. I'm just.
Well, I didn't apply any universality to it.
You said,
unless you're talking about the part where I said, if I don't like to be murdered, we can reasonably assume other people don't be.
That's
more of a societal thing. I'm thinking right. So constructivism can be a framework by which you get to subjective cognitivism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where your moral grounding, your objective grounding, is based on your society. That objective grounding might have been achieved through constructivism, right? These aren't mutually exclusive worldviews.
Sure. Okay.
So that is still an objective worldview, though built by people via rational and logical thought. And it's not now subjective cognitivists are not always constructivists. If you are born into a society that has an objective moral framework, an objective truth might have been constructed arbitrarily. For example, don't wear mixed fabrics. I would describe that as an arbitrary moral claim. That certainly was not gotten to via a constructivist method through logical debate and logical, talk. So they aren't the same, but they aren't also mutually exclusive. So another cognitivist theory is what's called error theory.
Okay.
So this is a pretty radical one. So the error theorists purport that moral claims are always false because moral facts don't exist. So again, when someone says murder is wrong, the error theorist would take that as a statement of truth or false, connotations, as something that can be true or false. But the error theorist asserts that an error theorist, cognitivist theory, is an anti-realist theory, meaning they don't believe true objective outside of mind theories of morality exist. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so the error theorist would be saying you can make a moral claim, but you're making like a categorical error because it's always going to be false. So in the same way, if I say like unicorns are red, okay, that is a claim that can be true or false. But the error theorist would say, well, it's just false by default because unicorns don't exist.
That's reasonable.
Yeah. Right. And that's how they would apply moral claims as well.
As in it doesn't exist.
Right. So like you're making a categorical error when you purport that something is right or wrong.
Right. The morality that arises in the minds of conscious creatures is completely localized to the mind, and it's not a representation of matter.
Right.
It's not
totally
natural,
baseless. Right. So that's the error theorist. So those are, and granted, there is a lot more cognitivist theories. That's just 3. There's a lot of them. So let's go on to some non-cognitivist theories. So one of the more popular ones of these is emotivism. I would say probably the most popular non-cognitivist theory. What a non-cognitivist theory says is that when someone makes a moral statement, they are not professing something that can be true or false. They are simply either making a command to do something or expressing an emotion, which leads us directly into emotivism. So this emotivism is described by moral claims are the expression of an emotion towards that which is provoking the claim. So when someone says murder is wrong, they're not saying something like, I don't like murder, because that can be taken as something that can be either true or false. When they say murder is wrong, they're simply expressing a emotional distaste toward murder. And when they say murder is wrong, that is the expression of that emotion.
And that seems common if you think about it. I feel like that's a lot of people do that, maybe without knowing. Because as an example,
well, what emotivists say is that is what everyone does always when they make a moral claim.
Which, I mean, I think that might be true in a lot of cases. I would say that a lot of people don't. It's not that everybody's opinions always are well informed or done through rational thought. It's, I don't like that. It's like you said, an emotional reaction. People who are homophobic, not just in a religious context, but just people who are homophobic. They see 2 dudes kissing, they're just like, ugh, I don't like that. That's wrong.
Yeah, when they exactly. If even somebody that is not religious, that's actually a really good example. Someone sees 2 dudes kissing and they experience a repulsion to it. When they say that's wrong, that is the expression of the repulsion. Right. That's not them saying, I think homosexuality is wrong, which can be true or false. That is literally them just making a word for the negative emotion that they're feeling at that moment.
Yeah. Which I would, I don't know if you're making this argument, but if you are, I agree that purely defining how you feel in terms of right and wrong is not correct.
Oh no,
it's not correct, but that is, I think, what people do. I think if you really to, well, because I mean, some people don't think it's necessarily wrong, but they could still be repulsed.
Of course. Well, you can think sushi is repulsive, but you're not going to say that that's immoral, are you?
I mean, I would say we're back to matter of preferences, but in more.
Well, that's what emotivism is. It is as.
I mean, right. more in the sense of like non-consequential. We're not talking about matters of morality. Sushi can't be morally wrong. I don't think, unless you think killing fish is wrong. That's the thing.
That's what I'm saying. As the emotivist, you don't think something called morality and right and wrong exist.
Right.
There is no right and there is no wrong. There is simply expression of emotion towards something.
Yeah. But I guess I do think that anybody who doesn't like sushi probably isn't going to look at a tray of sushi and go, that is wrong.
No.
They're just going to say yuck, which is
right.
Which is that's a different thing, I would say. Similar but different.
I don't know if it is. If someone sees two dudes kissing and gags, and then
as
says,
a repulsion, yeah.
And then someone sees sushi and then gags,
it's also a repulsion. But we're talking about. Say the word again.
Emotivism.
Emotivism. Didn't we just establish that is an expression of right and wrong in terms of?
It's not an expression of right and wrong. No.
Okay, so it's all it's saying is that that right and wrong doesn't exist, and people just have preferences.
Right.
But people still say things are right and wrong.
Right. When the emotivist frame is when people say something like blah 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 is wrong. Yeah. What is actually being communicated there from the person is I don't like that. It's not even I don't like this. It's this makes me feel bad.
Right. Which I get. My only point was that who's going to look at a plate of sushi and say it's wrong, as opposed to just they don't like it.
No one. But
I get your point though. It's right. It's the same in emotivist theory.
Right.
It's the same thing. But I'm just saying nobody says that. But
right.
That's not important to the conversation.
Yeah. In the emotivist sort of backstep to that, it's the same feeling, except one is being the only thing different about them is the words being said.
Yeah.
Homosexuality is wrong versus sushi is disgusting. Yet the feeling that provokes the words is the same.
That might be true, but I just feel like most people, when they say right and wrong, they have a different definition in their head.
I agree.
That's that. I mean, not we can dive into that further later. I'm sure.
Right. I think we get pretty deep into that. But people, even if emotivism is correct, even if it is correct, and there is truly no right and wrong, which I find emotivism maybe the most convincing. I find it sort of unfalsifiable, to be honest, which isn't a good thing. But it's hard to know where it could be incorrect, where it could go wrong, right? Because when people express moral claims, there's no instance where you can't just boil that down to an emotion that they're feeling about that, right? And then just reducing it to that and saying, well, when you say this is wrong, all you're really doing is just expressing a negative feeling you have towards it.
And that would then also, I'm assuming, include something like a religious background. The repulsion is just brought forth by dogma.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I'm following. Okay.
So I think emotivism, I mean, call it nihilistic because if it was to be true, and there is truly no such thing as right and wrong, then that really removes the basis for argumentation, for sure. If you think two people are arguing about something being right versus wrong, as an emotivist, you see that as, well, they're just arguing about emotions that they have toward this thing, and this really can't go anywhere.
Well, it just devolves right back into moral relativity.
Right. That's right. Exactly.
And you just go down to, well, how do we structure our society then? Knowing this, how do we structure our society?
Right. So if everybody,
which is not unreasonable,
no,
but we'll get to it.
Right. If everybody in the world right now had an emotivist worldview, and nothing like a cognitivist theory arose where we could ground some sort of objective morality, that might be a bad thing for society.
Let me ask you this question. Why do we need a moral foundation? Aside from strictly the mind, aside from strictly culture, why is it absolutely imperative that we have a moral basis outside of the mind?
I don't think anybody's claiming that it is, unless you're religious. You're talking like a realist theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think.
Okay, so you don't have a opinion on that because you don't feel that way?
I don't think, I would not call myself a realist. No, I don't think there is an objective morality independent of mind.
Okay. For whatever reason, I thought you were about to go that direction.
No, I would say,
because I also feel that way. I don't know how it could be that way. I mean, granted, I haven't heard a really solid argument for it. I guess maybe I could be convinced, but
I find realism a very challenging view to defend, because even if you're religious by nature, you pretty much have to be a realist. But
the creator of the universe is your moral framework.
When you describe your proposed deity as literally the good, God being not just God is good, but God literally is the same thing as good. Mm-hmm. Therefore, any command coming from good is going to be good, right?
Yeah.
That's what a realist theory is. But even then, realism can still be relative based on relative to what that deity commands.
Right. Does secular realism exist?
I don't see how it can.
Okay.
There's certainly secular cognitivist theories of where we build our own objective morality, right? But a realist thing where there is an objective morality independent of mind, I don't see how that could possibly exist in a secular worldview.
I agree. Yeah.
But if that does exist, bring it forward.
I'd be really
interested to see how that's possible.
Because I heard people talking about realism, specifically one of the interviews that I watched, and they were talking about it, and I was just like, oh, how does morality manifest in matter?
Now, here's the thing. Moral realism is not the same thing as realism on its own.
Okay.
So when you and I have been discussing realism today, we've just been referring to moral realism.
Yeah.
Realism is a separate thing.
Mm-hmm.
When I believe Christians, certainly Orthodox Christians, I believe any Christians are realist. But what realism is, I believe, I don't understand it super well, but abstractions like mathematics,
mm-hmm.
and also things like camera are real things that exist even before camera existed.
Oh.
So, and same goes for mathematics. When we think of 2 + 2 = 4, that is not mathematics is not something that we simply have thought up of to describe our world. It already existed out there in the ether, and we have discovered mathematics in the same way that this light, the abstraction aperture light, is something real before this clump of matter in its current formulation ever actually was formed.
Right.
And it's just something that we discovered. We matched the abstraction of this light with the arrangement of matter.
That's a little odd.
So that's a realist. That's what, not moral realist, but a realist, I believe, is.
So then moral would just be same idea.
Exactly. Moral is not only is those abstractions, abstractions of things out there already existing in the ether, but so is moral values. So
that's a little weird.
Yeah, realism is a weird thing.
Yeah.
I can't say I
mean, intuitively, like with the math example, if I got an apple and then I got another apple, there are two apples there. Now, what two is and how I call it two is completely man-made. But
right.
there are one and one. If I eat one of them, then I have one of them.
Right.
And that is real.
But the abstraction of the concept two is not something that I believe existed before we came around to make that abstraction.
The abstract concept never existed, but what it would come to represent absolutely did.
Right. There was never a point where one atom plus two atom didn't ever equal two of them. Yeah. Double what it started with.
Right.
But the abstraction of the concept of it is what I believe.
I think we can bookend that with saying we are not realists.
We are not realists. Realism is... There's some very smart realists out there. Not even just more realists.
I would love to hear some arguments.
Me too.
That would be very interesting.
They exist, and there are some very smart realists out there. I don't know if a secular realist exists.
See, that's what I'd want to know. That I don't really care about, like religious realism, because that's just religion.
That's grounded in Sky Daddy said it so.
Yeah.
That's not very interesting. But yeah, if a secular realist exists, that would be extremely interesting. So emotivism, we got through that. That's one non-cognitivist theory. Another non-cognitivist theory is prescriptivism. Moral claims are prescriptions of universalizable oughts for anybody in the same situation, in any given situation. So when somebody says murder is wrong, they are saying, given your situation, you shouldn't murder. I wouldn't murder, and neither should you or anybody else on the planet in your situation.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like emotivism, but pushing it on to other. It's like one step forward. It's like my emotion towards this is bad.
I feel, and therefore you should feel.
Exactly.
Odd.
It's called it's called prescriptivism because it is prescribing.
Prescribes.
Right. Yeah. Your sort of
it feels
emotivist.
It feels dangerous.
I don't like that one.
That feels dangerous specifically because it's subjective morality prescribed, which is never good.
But the thing is that's what people, arguably, that's what people do when they say something's wrong,
and it's not good.
I agree. But until you say that they're prescribing, well, you could say I would say in general agree that that's probably not good. But until they're trying to say to like a murderer, hey, murder is wrong.
Mm-hmm. And then we would agree.
Exactly. And then their prescription of their subjectivity being applied as universal is something that we would probably agree with. Because the prescriptivism view is when they say that, they are talking about them in that current situation.
Right.
Not necessarily murder under any situation.
The same person could say that murder in war is justified.
Right, exactly. And it would still be consistent with the prescriptivist theory.
Right.
So that one sounds bad at face value. And I would say on a whole, probably the way we as a society prescribe moral values probably is mostly bad. But another one is expressivism, another non-cognitivist theory. Moral claims are expressions of disapproval towards that which is provoking the claim. So this one is sort of just like prescriptivism minus one layer. So when you say it's not necessarily emotivism either.
I was gonna say wasn't emotivism
Prescriptivism
was plus one from emotivism, and now we're back to minus one.
Yeah. So these non-cognitivist theories are all more similar than the cognitivist theories are, and that's becoming apparent. So expressivism is the expression of disapproval toward an act. So when you say murder is wrong, you are just simply saying, I don't approve of this. Not necessarily it doesn't necessarily have to come from a place of emotional repulsion or even any negative emotion like emotivism does, but it can be something that you disapprove of regardless of the emotion you're feeling toward it.
That's just subjective morality again. It's just a different way to define it, but
but it's not grounded in the way that you feel.
Well, I guess you're right. So if you don't approve of it, that leaves room for reason.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Right. So, and even with non-cognitivist theories, there's a lot of these things. There's so many. And the amount of isms that I have read about in the past week is overwhelming. And it's all of them end with ism. And it's crazy.
Well, that's what the word. That's words.
Except error theory, I guess.
Errorism.
Erroristicism. But yeah, so that's morality. And these aren't even what's called normative ethical theories. A normative ethical theory would be something like utilitarianism, which is a framework that you should follow. Mm-hmm. These aren't that. These are simply theories that try to describe the semantics of a moral claim.
Right.
So they're not necessarily a normative framework, but they are a theory.
It's trying to build a framework on what people do.
Right.
And less about how people should be.
Right, exactly. Something like utilitarianism, or there's a lot of forms of utilitarianism too. The classic one being hedonistic act consequentialism. That is classic utilitarianism, where any act should be to maximize utility, and good and bad being as defined hedonistically, meaning pleasure is the only intrinsic good and pain is the only intrinsic bad. So you should work to maximize pleasure and minimize pain.
Right.
That's classic utilitarianism. And honestly, that's maybe like the default sort of framework for somebody that's never really thought about morality, perhaps.
Yeah.
Whether that person would be speaking cognitively or non-cognitively, the sort of framework followed for something like morality, I think kind of utilitarianism is the default. But someone like Peter Singer who is currently like the face of modern day utilitarianism, he would not be described as a hedonistic act consequentialist, but he takes his utilitarianism. Can you tell I'm getting tongue-tied with all the isms? He takes it a lot further, and I would say to its logical continuation of not only the well-being of conscious humans, but creatures in general.
Sure. Yeah.
So he wrote in 1975, Peter Singer wrote the book Animal Liberation, which basically was the book that started the animal rights movement in general. Like veganism and all that stuff was barely, you didn't hear about it until before that book.
Right.
Or until after that book. So Peter Singer today is like one of the most influential philosophers alive still. Like he has the waves that he has made in morality through society. He's one of the biggest reasons people know and understand the problems and what actually goes on in factory farms and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, he would take his utilitarianism to the animal world. And if you honestly, I really agree with his arguments.
Yeah.
Like animal suffering is something that's real and should be taken seriously.
I don't know if I could really respect an opinion on morality that didn't at least speak to the well-being of animals.
Right.
I don't really know if I could respect any argument that forego to that.
Right. Yeah. So I think we'll talk a little bit more about animals too, but I do want to get into some like moral, typical moral repulsions that I think should be brought into the light to make sure that we can actually find something wrong with them. Like bestiality, for example, things that we find repulsive, necrophilia, incest, all this. Just you get a physical reaction when you think about it, and it's not good.
Right.
But is it morally wrong? So, and Peter Singer in his recent book Ethics in the Real World actually does bring up incest, and as a utilitarianist, there's nothing really bad with that, right? Under the utilitarian framework.
Well, what is the counter argument? The counter argument is birth defects,
of course.
But if you're not having relations to reproduce and take measures to not reproduce,
like there's contraceptives to pretty much eliminate that possibility.
Right. So I mean, I would, given that, I would say you've got me fairly convinced.
Right.
Well, I mean, not convinced in the sense that I like it, but convinced. Let's be clear.
You heard it here first.
not convinced in the sense that I like it, but convinced in the sense that I can't really find an issue.
There's nothing you can point your finger to and say, well, there's the obvious harm that's happening.
Other than reproductive issues.
Well, let's say you got two lesbian sisters.
Right. Well, then there you go. You're Bob's
exactly.
Your uncle.
Point to the thing that's wrong with that. Now, so evolutionarily, the reason we are repulsed to that is because of the ones that had birth defects didn't do any reproducing.
Yeah.
So the ones that were repulsed to procreating with the people they grew up with were more likely to pass on their genes. Therefore, everybody now is repulsed to copulate with the person they grew up with. And
right.
that is known because the repulsion establishes itself not within siblings, but within specifically just that, people you grew up with. Siblings separated at birth, reunited, don't have this repulsion. But adopted siblings that grew up together do. Because how the heck would evolution know if somebody has your genetics or not? It wouldn't. So the repulsion was built up over the course of growing up with people, not necessarily. Because if it were the case that you were repulsed with the thought of copulating with a sibling, then you would be able to tell a sibling in a random crowd if you were separated at birth by the thought of having sex with that person.
Right.
But that's obviously You
do
can't
that.
know
I mean,
that.
that happens in movies. Like, God, I watched a show recently. It was a terrible show. It was awful, but it was a father who wasn't in his daughter's life and came back and went to a party before they were going to meet up the next day, but nothing happened, but they like flirted pretty hard. And then the next morning it was like, oh shit, that's my dad.
That's my dad.
Point being, they didn't know.
Yeah. So that repulsion is with people you grew up with, and it has literally nothing to do with genetics, which is just, like I said, you ain't going to be catching me doing that. But and you ain't gonna be catching me enjoying thinking about that. But the morality aspect is, I would say, pretty conclusively, there's nothing morally incorrect about it. How could there be?
Right. Yeah.
Which, I mean, could you say the same thing about something like, I was gonna say bestiality, but
the problem is you can't. There's no way to have consent. That's the problem.
Yeah, and also, I don't know if they'd be enjoying it.
Well, they wouldn't have consent. That's
Right.
But on both of those fronts are essentially the same front. You can't. They're not going to enjoy it, and they can't tell you that they're okay with it.
So, under the utilitarianist view, you would be causing harm.
Yeah,
to a conscious creature.
Yeah,
so that couldn't be determined as a moral wrongdoing,
right?
Which I think is fantastic.
Yeah,
that we can decide that.
That's great.
That is great news.
So happy.
Right. Yeah. So that's some
stuff.
That's some stuff that we're gonna move on. So something like, it's hard to know what side I'm on when it comes to a cognitivist or non-cognitivist point of view, because I think I like the idea of cognitivism more because of its general objective frameworks that these moral claims being as something true or false are built on. Mm-hmm. I like that more than something like a non-cognitivist theory where it's mostly just anything goes. Right. And there is no basis for moral debate because the two are simply just clashing emotions. But it's hard to disprove something like emotivism. It's hard to find a hole where that might be incorrect, where that might be wrong as to how we operate. I certainly can't think of a.
I mean, I can't think of one either. Like I said, it seems legitimate.
Because even if you believe yourself as a cognitivist and say that your moral framework is built on the objectivity of society. Let's just make this as reasonable as possible. Let's say you're a cognitivist and your moral framework is built on your society's objective morality built through constructivism. So it's something rational.
Yeah.
Even then, you can boil it down to, well, you're still just expressing the emotion you feel towards these things, and you feel that emotion because you grew up in this society, and this is what you were told is right and wrong. So that's why you feel this emotion towards what you believe is to an objective framework.
Right, and that's you could also make the argument that that's why even secular people who became secular maybe grew up in a more religious culture can hold over some more religious ideals even into their secular life, and they still express those religious type ideals even as a secular person.
Right. They might not even believe in moral realism anymore, yet they might still emotively express their moral beliefs from the realist view.
Right.
And that might not even be something that they want to do, but that is what their brain during the developmental years was constructed to believe.
Right.
So something like emotivism is hard to... It's really hard to disprove, but I do hope. I mean, it's emotivism. Let's say emotivism could be true, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't go through life as a cognitivist in practice,
Right.
which would most likely result in a more I would say a better life in society than something like emotivism would.
Just having the ability to establish moral.
Yeah, having the ability to argue about something moral, I think is...
I mean, you can still argue, but
But the end
you can still argue in the attempts to sway culture or government or something, but
Sure.
you can't do it on philosophical grounds.
Not really. Which I would think is important. But yeah, I that's pretty much all I got.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot more to talk about in the world of morality.
I mean, yeah, I think one thing that I would really want to talk about is that book we brought up, the Moral Landscape.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because
of course.
I think, and I don't, and I only did so much research on this, so, and I think you did quite a bit more as far as looking into this viewpoint, but I do find it very interesting, and this is what we talked about that last episode that we talked about morality in depth.
Sorry to cut you off, but let's establish what we're actually even talking about. So Sam Harris, his moral framework is a cognitivist view where moral claims can be right or wrong, and his objective grounding is honestly quite a bit deeper than most cognitivist theories, I would say. It's grounded with literally just the well-being of conscious creatures. That's a really deep grounding. That's something that goes it goes to the core of conscious creatures, you would say.
Right.
So it is, I don't even know if there's a name for it, but he calls it just the moral landscape. But yeah, so basically there are right and wrong answers to questions of facts and values related to morality, and the right answer would be the well-being maximized answer. That would be morally right versus the well-being minimized as a whole. It's definitely a cognitivist view. It's kind of like a modification of utilitarianism in a way.
A little bit.
It's not necessarily hedonistic, like pleasure pain utilitarianism.
Well, and he specifically talks about it in the book. He specifically talks about that we're not talking about pleasure because pleasure arises other issues. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's sort of a modified utilitarianism. And I think it's a very reasonable view. But that is what we're describing when we talk about this moral landscape.
Right. And we talked about it last time, and I think my main issue at the time, not only that my basis of understanding was your basis of understanding,
which was a limited basis. Yeah.
So I had limited knowledge in that discussion. In combination, my other issue was the utility aspect. What?
Oh, the application of something like this.
The application.
Right.
And I think that's a valid concern. Well, here's why, and he kind of touched on it in the book. One of the common criticisms is moral imperialism.
Right.
And if we're going to say something is objectively true based on it regardless of culture, it only comes down to the well-being of people. Who is deciding what well-being is good and what well-being is, what diminishes well-being, and can we really push these beliefs, these facts that we're going to call them, onto another culture?
Right.
And your main bring up with that was the extremes, which Sam Harris also did. The the ones that are killing their citizens or what have you.
Right.
And he could say, well, that is objectively worse for those people. And therefore, if it is diminishing the well-being of those people, then it is objectively wrong.
Right. Yeah. That, which I think is I like that. And the way he grounds, so he grounds his objective basis a little bit, back to what I was saying, a little bit deeper than most cognitivist theories do, by way of saying that we can determine it as objectively as we determine anything else in science.
Mm-hmm.
By way of...
This was fascinating. Okay. Sorry to cut you off, but what I'm saying is more important. And what I'm about to say is probably exactly what you were about to say. But therefore, we're both important. But so what he goes on to say, and this is what I was missing from this when you were talking about it, is that we can make truth claims on nutrition, as an example. And just because I like this food and you like this food that's not the claim issue here. That's not the right or wrong. That's not the good for you versus bad for you. That's a preference. And that has no bearing on morality. Mm-hmm. What the difference is does something further your nutritional health or does it diminish it? And that's the distinction. So it's not about comparing two goods. It's about distinguishing between a good and a bad.
Yeah.
That's and I think that's when we talked about the last time, I kind of got hung up on that because we really fell into a rabbit hole of talking about, well, I've got this peak and you've got this peak, and maybe you're just missing out. And that might be true.
Right.
But I don't think Sam Harris was really focusing on trying to compare good well-beings. That wasn't the focus.
No, absolutely not.
And I think we got hung up on that. It was really interesting to hear him more nail down this bad versus good. What is better as opposed to bad, and not so much as what is the preferential direction of two good well-beings.
Yes. Yeah, that is... Yes, absolutely. That is something that I don't think I did really elaborate on the however many months ago that episode was when we were arguing about it.
Yeah, I think it was like 2 or 3 months ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the same way, and he also grounds the objectivity of there is the part of the important bit is differentiating a good from a bad. Yeah. That is the important bit. But how he links morality or how he links what is good and what is bad to human well-being.
Right.
Like who's to really say my well-being has anything to do with what is truly the good and the bad.
Right.
Right. The way he links it to, well, the simple way he does it at the beginning of the book is imagine the worst possible misery for everybody. Mm-hmm. In any way that you can use the word bad, that describes it.
Right.
That is bad. So if the opposite of it is good, which if anything better than that would be better than the worst possible misery, then it would have to be the opposite. The antithesis of it would be the good.
Yeah.
And since if anybody uses the word bad doesn't mean that, then we're just using totally different definitions of what bad means.
Right. Bad has to mean something. Is basically the point. It can't just be a floating nothing word.
Exactly.
And because at that point you might as well just say that you don't like it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the sort of simple way he grounds this objectivity. But even at that level, even if the entire world agreed upon that would be bad, we could probably say, all right, we've established an objective morality here. Somebody else diverting from it is probably just a bit mistaken.
Right.
But what that doesn't do is establish objectivity independent of mind. It's still what would be considered a constructivist cognitive theory. It's constructed objectivity. But he goes a little bit further than that and says that we can say it's as objective as anything else we say in the world of science. So how he claims that is we can't actually say what is truly, unmovingly, ultimately objective at all.
Yeah.
In science. Because we might, for all we know, be a brain in a vat, and relativity could just be constructed. So what we have to do is lay down axiomatic presuppositions and then build objectivity on that presupposition, this axiom that is sort of default without questioning.
Yeah, he really did, and I appreciated this as somebody who was going in not opposed, but going in skeptical. I appreciated that he made it very clear that this is not to define what is moral for the end of to the end of time. Yeah, that's not the purpose. And he just like you said, he used scientific reason as that grounding. It is nothing in science is true forever necessarily, and it is discovered and discussed with the understanding that this could evolve.
Exactly. And with the understanding, with the axiom of we aren't in a simulation, because there are axioms we have to just assume is true. So he relates that to morality in if we can make objective claims in science that are still resting upon an axiomatic presupposition, we can do the same thing with morality and say that given that pretty much anybody on planet Earth would say that the worst possible misery for everyone is bad, we can use that. That's our axiomatic presupposition. That's the default that we can just assume is true. And then we'll build from that.
Let me ask you this, because I'm gearing up to share a thing with you. We can talk about what maximal well-being is and what the worst possible well-being is. What do you think the components of well-being are necessarily?
Well, he even says in the book that whatever the highest point of well-being may not be, it certainly isn't something that we know and maybe can't know.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
I want to share something with you. I had seen this actually years ago, and I didn't think about it afterwards because it wasn't relevant at the time. But what is this called here? So I'm about to send you something. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if you've ever seen this before.
I've heard of that.
And I don't know if it's super relevant to this conversation, but I really liked it as a framework of defining well-being.
Okay, so for audio listeners, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah, I have seen this before. So there's 5 layers of ground level essential needs ascending to lesser important needs. And it starts with physiological needs: air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction. That is your base level, maximal importance needs.
Well, not only is it maximally important, what Maslow's hierarchy of needs also does is it tells you what you need. This is completely unrelated to the subject that we're talking about, but what it also does that's interesting is it lays down what you need before you can ascend. These are examples of the things you need to nail down before you can ascend to higher levels of well-being. Okay. You need food, water, shelter before you can, have, I don't know, other things. Friendship, families, sense of
let's just list it off. So at the base level, we've got the physiological needs. One above that is safety needs. personal security, employment, resources, health, and property. So you would be saying that you first need your air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction before you can get something like your health.
Right.
Which I would agree.
Yeah.
And above the safety needs, we've got love and belonging, friendship, intimacy, family, and sense of connection. I have some opinions on that. I'll keep going just to finish it. Above that, we have esteem, respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, freedom, and then self-actualization at the very top. Desire to become the most that one can be.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, those top three, I think, could be a bit reordered.
You think?
Yeah. I don't think, though. I think physiological and safety are in their right spots. I think self-actualization can honestly apply at the third in place of love and belonging.
Yeah. The way I don't really know if I agree with what they're saying here. The desire to become the most that you can be. I think it's
that can honestly that could
be anything.
Any of them.
What I think of when I think of the self-actualization as the final step, it's more along the lines of, like some people would say, satisfying a creative need, or doing exactly what you want to do instead of what you need to do. As in, that's what I think. Like, it's not that, I go to work every day to collect a paycheck, but now I'm doing this creative outlet as my occupation. I'm doing what I want to do for me more than I'm doing what I want to do because I need these other things.
Right.
That's why I would say it's at the top. Because
Okay.
you need these other things. And just like that, in order to truly be able to pursue those things, you need maybe not respect necessarily, but you need strength and freedom and self-esteem in order to achieve higher goals.
Right.
Which puts it firmly at the top.
So self-actualization, if it's interpreted in that way, then yeah, I think it should be at the top. So yeah, but really, I think the important ones that are pretty spot on, I believe, is this physiological needs and safety needs.
Right.
And love and belonging, community is extremely important.
Right.
Having people, I mean, there's a reason solitary confinement is the worst place you could be in a prison.
Right.
Right. Being isolated is not good for a human at all. So that being above safety needs in level 3, I think maybe it is in a good spot because it is extremely important.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like it's above safety needs because, like, the first one is personal security. What good is,
what good is having friends if you're gonna get killed?
Yeah,
because you have no personal security.
Well, the only reason I brought this up is not that this as a whole is necessarily pertinent, but what I think is interesting is when we're talking about what is well-being, it's the thing that takes away from these qualities, which is what I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's a good way. When you say what is well-being, you can frame it as the thing that reduces this hierarchy of needs, but you could also say, well, what's the opposite of well-being?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be easy. Pain, death,
right?
Suffering, just that, and then just kind of reverse those, and then that's what you get. So maybe the quest for well-being is get the basics, but not so much run toward a furtherment of well-being, but run further away from what diminishes well-being.
Right.
So,
which I think that idea is consistent with what Sam Harris was talking about.
Right.
Because it wasn't necessarily about the purpose. I already said this, but the purpose wasn't necessarily about how to have a higher sense of well-being than you previously did. That was definitely touched upon, but more about how do we know what is the opposite, and how do we establish confidently and objectively what is counterproductive.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure you now, having listened to it via someone smart and not someone dumb, are much more empathetic to the view of
Yeah.
to that objective moral framework.
Well, and what helped was, again, not feeling like it's not about deciding on controversial issues. Because that's how I felt like it was last time when we talked about it. That's not necessarily what you said, but that's how I was viewing it. Because we're talking about a moral framework, and when I thought of moral frameworks, I thought of a divisive issue.
Right.
But it's not about that. It's about baselines. It's about establishing the direction of a society in a not super specific way. Specific in the sense that
it's a framework.
It's a framework, exactly. Right. Which so I'm pretty open to that, and I think using the idea of conscious entity well-being is open enough that the only people that are going to have a problem with that are people who just don't want things to be objective, which there are people like that.
I was going to say, not only just don't want things to be objective, but don't believe that things can be objective, whether they want it or not.
Which, I mean, yeah, that's what I'm talking about, is people that are against that for whatever reason, whether they don't want it or think it's not possible.
Right. So that's I would say a scratch of the surface when it comes to morality. And there's a lot more that can be said. Like I said, I didn't even get into half of the cognitivist and non-cognitivist theories, and I didn't even get into pretty much any of the normative ethical frameworks, other than a little bit of utilitarianism and, of course, the moral landscape. So there's a lot more that could be talked about, but certainly not in this episode because we've already talked about a lot. We're going to a bi-weekly schedule.
As evidenced by the fact that there was nothing last week.
Exactly. We're springing it on you immediately with no mention ahead of time. So we're going to go to a bi-weekly schedule because we want to be able to provide better, more qualitative, not necessarily quantitative information. And we both have full-time jobs and need time to research.
That sucks.
And that sucks. So for the sake of that, we're going to go to bi-weekly schedule, but we're still going to have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
See ya.